Hello and welcome to What the Tech from Boast AI, where we talk with some of the brilliant minds behind new and exciting tech initiatives to learn what it takes to tackle technological uncertainty and eventually change the world. I'm Paul Davenport, Boast's resident tech journalist and head of content. And today I'm thrilled to welcome to the show Leigh Christie, co-founder of Misty West. Launched in 2008, Misty West is a product design firm that specializes in wireless, portable, low-power devices that can survive in harsh conditions like underground mines. Their work with seed to Series B startups and Fortune 500 innovation teams, building novel products across industries such as mining tech, smart infrastructure, and supply chain logistics, with the ultimate goal of creating futuristic technologies that advance the UN's Sustainability Development Goals. Leah's team at Misty West are also Boast partners who share our vision for helping connect innovators with the resources they need to bring real-world changing products to market. Thrilled to pick his brain on how he got into the innovation space, what he's seen in the almost 2 decades since founding Misty West, and what's on the roadmap. So, without further ado, welcome to the show, Leigh.
Thank you so much, Paul, for having me on. I appreciate it.
Awesome. It is my total pleasure. So, I was speaking with your team earlier. We're actually relaunching our podcast. So, I'm very happy that we could get somebody like you who has this great background in the ecosystem on both sides of the border on to chat with me and kind of get the ball back rolling again. So, to kick it off, going to turn it to you. Tell me about yourself. I'd love to know, how did you get into the innovation space in the first spot and what sparked your
Sure.
entrepreneurial spirit?
Yeah, absolutely. My motivation originally was climate change, like fighting climate change, and just my passion for technology. Just even if I wasn't trying to make the world a better place, I was always trying to make stuff and take stuff apart and break stuff. And so combining those two was kind of a no brainer for me in my sort of late teens, early 20s. And got into electric vehicles, originally fuel cell vehicles, and then eventually got into electric vehicles. And that's kind of in some ways what led to Misty West. Originally, it was a skimboard skateboard company in 2020, 2004. We manufactured skimboards and skateboards. That was a big surprise, not a very lucrative business, and got into electric vehicles. So right around 2008, 2009, 2010, we were working for Rapid Electric Vehicles, Signature Renewables, Electric Auto Sports, and some other companies, all of which are defunct now. And there was sort of a blip there where a whole bunch of renewable energy companies and electric vehicle companies were kind of getting funding in the late 2000s, but almost all those companies went bankrupt. And so we had to pivot our business model away from automotive, away from transportation. So actually the name of our company is Misty West Energy and Transport. That's sort of harkening back to those days. But we're actually now focused more on, like you mentioned, intelligent and connected devices that are typically small, much smaller than a vehicle for the most part, and typically are battery powered, typically wireless, and have some sort of embedded intelligence inside of them. But just going back to, you were asking about my origin. Maybe what I didn't mention is that my background is in engineering physics. So I'm a hardcore engineer at heart. That's what I was put on this planet to do. That's what I love. And but I've become a bit of a business person over the years. We've been running this company now for over 15 years, and even longer if you go all the way back to the skateboard days. And so what that has meant is I've had to put a lot of my engineering on the back burner and focus more on business and sales, marketing, strategy, supply chain, recruiting, nurturing, training, coaching, mentoring. And so and more recently, one thing I'm really loving is partnerships, just building excellent partnerships with groups like yours, and trying to make this whole industry more efficient. I love the idea of partnering with other companies where we're not just all, scrambling to find sales leads. And, it's much better when it's Misty West can say, hey, we don't really do that, but we know a company that does, and we can call them up and say, hey, we got a lead for you. And then vice versa, companies calling us up and saying, hey, we need some help with a handheld device or a wearable device. It's low power wireless. Maybe it's using a Nordic chipset. Maybe it's a Zephyr, RTOS, some kind of real-time firmware, some, Bluetooth this or Wi-Fi that or LoRaWAN or whatever. And so we find that people kind of come to us for what we're experts for. But yeah, long story short, what you're asking about is the origin story here, and I keep diverging into what we do, but that's kind of how we got to where we were, was through this convoluted path of working on all sorts of different technologies. And the reason for that, like I mentioned, is because I'm super passionate about technology first and foremost. And now I would say that like we're kind of past that early stage of the company. We've become a lot more mature. We're now way more focused than we used to be. So we used to kind of do like after electric vehicles, we kind of did a little bit of everything.
Hmm.
But then we were known as this like hardcore problem solving, deep tech, you know, university lab to commercialization kind of company. We did a lot of that for many years. But then now we're really focused on commercialized intelligent and connected devices for mining tech, health tech, and of course smart infrastructure, including logistics and materials handling.
I loved all of that. So first off, for starters, my dad lives out in San Diego. So when you were saying skimboards and skateboards and the foldables, I'm like, I think he might have an old Ori board in his garage. I don't hold me to that, but like, love that
Cool.
ethos. I'm a big bike guy. I was actually talking with Rory before you hopped on the call about his biking
All right.
trip in Greece and in Europe. So that's all music to my ears. Also explains the synergies on your own team. You have people with that similar ethos and just about like the efficiencies and transportation on the one hand, but like bridging that passion across again, maybe some more consumer focus at the start, but then a real problem solving ethos as the company has evolved. That's
Yeah.
amazing. I also find in talking to a lot of like founders or just innovators in the tech ecosystem, the ones who are really passionate, they do that expansion that you were talking about, where sure, I went in for the hard tech and to the really build stuff, but you spread your wings and you learn about the business because you are actually passionate about seeing those things through to success and maybe grinning and bearing it and having some uncomfortable learning experiences or navigating waters that maybe weren't intuitive or something you learned when you were at the school for actually building stuff. So I
Yeah.
think that well rounded background and then zeroing in on the focus really cool. I see that as probably like a winning characteristic that's most common thread among the folks that we talk to. And then that final piece too about how Misty West, again, that is focused now. You were kind of doing all broad based problem solving in the past, but you're really
Yep.
focused on these solutions today that I think you need to survive in this market, but to also, again, bring people along with you. Our ethos at
Yeah.
Boast is we don't know all the answers, but we try to find the people in the spaces that can help other partners we work with get those. So similar ethos on both sides. We love the
Cool.
partnerships. We love meeting with folks like you guys who can get people who might be in our ACP, but again, we don't want to just be cynical. We want to provide a real resource. So I'll stop
Yeah.
digressing on that, but loved that
Cool.
genesis. Love that origin story. Now, we did
Yeah.
start talking about Misty West and what brought you here today, but could you talk to me specifically about some of the products that you guys are most passionate about right now? What you might be most happy to see in market, or what's actually driving the most innovation in your space? I know I got some product names in here, but I'd love to hear it from you.
Yeah. I mean, for starters, mining tech is booming. Just because of critical minerals for electric cars. Um, so that's been big for us. So I would say there's a lot of traction there. And I would say historically, like smart logistics and materials handling was like for a while there was our biggest industry. But you can't just pick one industry, like because every once in a while that industry will be in the dumps.
Yep.
It's cyclical, right? So you have to have a little bit of diversity there. So we do really want to focus as best we can, but there are also some advantages to not just picking just one industry, unless you're in medical or defense. That is the one exception. If you're a medical engineering consultancy, you can just do medical. Like it's so big and so conducive to consulting. Defense is the same way. If you're a defense contractor, you can just only do defense if you want to. Contracts tend to be very long term. Um, but yeah, so that's on the industry side. On the technology side, it's really for us, it's all about Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, like low power wireless communication standards, where we're building and designing the packaging, the electronics, PCBA. We're helping choose the chipset, and then ultimately we're trying to we're trying to provide a full solution, including the firmware and software. So, and sometimes it even involves industrial design. So it can be through all these different disciplines, all the way through, and packaged up into a functional prototype, or ultimately a commercializable production prototype, and then ultimately a handoff to the contract manufacturer or to the client who manufactures the product themselves. Um, so that's kind of how we're set up. And our projects tend to be either fixed price or fee for service. But at the end of the day, we're providing engineering services to a company where we're looking for what we call a Misty West shaped hole. That is to say that companies, in many cases, they're either missing our skill set outright, or they have our skill set, but it's in short supply, and they don't want to go out and hire a bunch of full-time engineers. They could go out and hire a freelancer for 6 months, but in some cases they're hiring 4 or 5 freelancers, and at some point it just doesn't make sense. You just may as well hire a firm like us, and we can give you what you want. It requires a lot less work and a lot less finger pointing if things go wrong.
I think name of episode, Misty West shaped hole. I think that's a perfect way of characterizing how you guys fit
Yeah.
right into it. And again,
That's
that it's soup to nuts. It's you guys are doing the full suite.
That's a Taylor Cooperism.
Yeah.
Taylor Cooper's our CEO. That's his catchphrase. Misty West shaped hole. But yeah, but just sorry. Actually, one thing I didn't mention about the technology is that
Sure.
like the way I kind of divide it up is, so there's intelligent devices and then there's connected devices. Most connected devices aren't intelligent, but most intelligent devices are connected. And so we do both. It's not like it has to be intelligent. It can be connected, but not intelligent. And by intelligence, what I usually mean is there's some kind of neural processing unit or some
Yep.
kind of math, hardware acceleration component to it. Whether that's an NPU or not is kind of a different question. But and on the connectivity side, usually it's some kind of low power wireless communication protocol. But more often than not, those tend to be wearables and handhelds. Not always, but that's just kind of like the way it kind of works out. Because if it's handheld, it's got to be lightweight. It's wearable, it's got to be lightweight. So that means a smaller battery pack, and that means you have to really push the limits of what's possible with battery life, which is where we really excel. It's kind of a key offering that we have. So that was one area of growth, is this sort of low power wireless stuff. And then the other category is something that's not a huge industry for us, but is like AI cameras or smart cameras. So or just cameras more generally. Basically, the optics, mechanical engineering, building the camera board, and then writing all the firmware, the drivers, packaging the whole thing up into a super rugged, reliable, package that's aesthetically pleasing or ergonomic or whatever it has to be. And we actually have a product. This is our only product that we sell. It's called Misty Vision. It's an AI vision system that's based around Misty SOM, which is a system on module that we built using an RZ-V2L chipset that does have an NPU on board. So it's very much an edge compute device. That is to say, it's not reliant on the cloud. So we built a solar-powered, battery-powered version of that camera that you can just set it up wherever you want, anytime, anywhere, and it will tell you what it sees. You can train it on with a machine learning model. Are you looking at a deer? Are you looking at a bear? Are you looking at a truck or a garbage truck or a logging truck? Is that a person on a bicycle, a motorcycle? Is it someone illegally crossing the border with a suitcase full of guns?
Yeah.
Are there birds on the tarmac of the airport? So whatever you want to see, you can look at rail cars going in and out of ports. So the people that seem to be most interested in this tend to be like airports, ports, railroads, border security, perimeter security. These are sort of the early adopters, and now highways too. Highways is big too. So those are the early adopters. It is right now a fairly expensive camera, but the goal is to get it down to be globally cost competitive and into that sub $20,000 category is kind of where we're headed with it.
The thing is too, like you're covering all those interdependencies. It's not just about engineering the like potential realities of it. Even talking about like the batteries, that's one, but the packaging, that's another. And then even just like what you're watching for to even train those models. It's just so many things beyond even just the traditional firmware that they might be going to an engineering company or consultancy for, that you guys are covering all the bases for. And that's the path to actually getting it all to be more affordable in the long run, because you're not just considering some of the hard stuff now, you're thinking about it comprehensively and holistically, which
Yeah.
that's a big differentiator. And I think that's really powerful in the market too. I'm thinking
Yeah.
too, I worked at a computer vision company in the past, and they wrote a lot of checks they couldn't ultimately cash back in the day. They're no longer with us, so I don't feel bad. I'm not going to name them, but they didn't do that full-fledged holistic approach to it all. They'd work on an algorithm, they'd sell it to a farmer, they'd be like, hey, we can even do some heat detection because we can see the evaporations from like some of your silos or things like that. But then the batteries weren't there. And then you'd have to pull in other players for that, or the packaging didn't make sense. And it's so like you can't just sell one piece of it off the shelf. Ultimately, if you do want to,
Right.
again, drive down those costs and then drive up adoption, you got to look at the whole problem. So I love that that's the approach that you guys take.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the approach we take, and we kind of had to. We didn't really have a choice. We're not a big company. We're not known as a products company. We're known as an engineering services company, and so we're kind of starting that from scratch. But we had the engineering know-how to do it, so we're like, well, let's just do it. And as it turns out, that camera is running right now at YVR Airport. You can, if you search YVR Airport, Misty Vision in Google, you'll see all these different news articles that came out about it. That camera's still running. Like, it's super reliable. It's working perfectly. And so we built a really, really, really reliable machine learning. I call it an infrastructure independent machine learning camera, or AI camera. Again, that is to say, it's not dependent on the cloud or
Yeah.
anything. Almost all of its compute is done on board. And if you want to do more compute in the cloud, you certainly can. You can transfer the
Mhm.
data, and then you can reanalyze it and whatnot. But yeah, it tells you, it can differentiate between 13 different kinds of trucks.
That's wild. I'm like, that's my homework assignment for after this call. I'm doing some Googling YVR. And now next time I fly out there, I'm going to be keeping an eye out too when I get there. I also love too
Yeah.
that you made that distinction too between connected and intelligent, because I think that's something that gets conflated a lot. And I know that was earlier in the conversation, but I did just want to bring that back up because that's not something you should conflate. Just because it's connected doesn't necessarily mean it's intelligent. And you gotta have all the other considerations in the background too when you're creating devices or just like solutions like you're talking about here. Um, Now, one other thing too that I'd be remiss if I didn't come into the conversation to start discussing a little bit, but funding innovation and capital strategy and just like building innovative solutions that maybe haven't been proven in the market, but you still want
Sure.
to get lit for them. How have you approached that in the past as a founder, as somebody who's worked on so many different products too? Just what's been your experience with that?
So how to get projects greenlit on the client side?
Yeah, I guess how do you get them greenlit on the client side, but also just funding innovation? I mean, specifically at Boast, we help companies with shred tax credits in Canada or R&D tax credits in the US, so you can kind of recoup the costs of your investments into that product development and those engineering costs. But has that been something that you guys have tapped into or other partners you've worked with? And just what's been your experience getting capital when you really need it to get off the ground? I mean, whether that's traditional VCs, whether that's just outside funding rounds. How have you navigated that?
Sure. So there's two separate questions there. There's the
Yeah,
funding, and, to get the funding to get your project off the ground, or to continue working on it to get to the next version. And then there's sort of like the customer sales side, like making sure you have the demand for your product. If it's in the consumer space, I think we've learned over the years that you have to know what the demand looks like before you start designing it. Like, you can do some basic industrial design or something like that, but basically putting out teasers to figure out if people actually want to buy it. That's one thing Kickstarter is so good for, is it kind of proves how big the market is, or it gives you some indication. Um, so in the consumer space, that's one way to look at it. In the industrial space, often they know there's demand, because often the customer, they already have the customer, usually, because usually someone has said to them, "Hey, we need this thing," and they're like, "Well, we should just make that." And then they try to figure out, well, how much will it cost to make it, and and how many people actually want to buy it.
yeah,
So we're big fans of ROI calculations for the
mhm,
latter. The former is a bit different. It's harder to calculate, but for industrial purposes, it's usually like some kind of cost savings, right? There's usually something that's done manually, or some safety related device where it could hurt somebody and you want to make it safer. So there's usually some way of doing those calculations that kind of show the value of the work. And once you know it's going to save them $20 million,
for sure.
it's kind of a no-brainer to spend $500,000 or even $1 million to go and fix that. And that's where Misty West comes in, is that people come to us and say, "Hey, we've got this problem. We're not really sure the solution. Here's some back of the napkin sketches of what we have in mind. Oh, and by the way, here's the ROI calculation. This is
Yeah,
like what's the whole thing here." And then there's usually a deadline being driven by a trade show, or a demo demonstrating it to the investors, or demonstrating it to senior executives to decide whether they're going to get funding next year for it or whatever. And so more often than not, when we're doing a proof of concept or a functional prototype, it's because they got to demonstrate it to the people who are funding the project. Now, going back to funding, for Canadian startups, I think Shred is great. IRAP is great. Scale AI and there's lots of different options there. So to answer your question on the funding side, yeah, there's a lot of non-dilutive funding in Canada, which is really great. So, IRAP, Shred, Scale AI, Innovate BC, Next Gen or NGen grants, Pacific Can. If someone's watching this, if someone's watching this interview and they want to learn more about that, reach out to me. I'll put you in touch with someone from the Misty West team. We're very experienced at that stuff, and I think Boast, you guys have a pretty incredible track record there as well. And so I think I would encourage anyone who's watching this interview, like, hit us up. We can talk about that stuff from the engineering side. You guys can talk about that from the funding side. But non-dilutive funding in Canada, if you're an American company, consider just moving here, because it's incredible. It's incredible what you can accomplish here in Canada with these government initiatives. The reason why basically what it comes down to is, in the U.S. they have the Department of Defense. They have a lot of defense spending, and there's a lot of grants out there in defense for companies to do R&D. In Canada, rather than spending all that money on defense, they spend a similar amount of money, but it goes towards innovation spending, which is kind of like defense spending, but just by another name, because it's not being used for defense, but it is making sure that we stay technologically competitive as a country, which means ultimately that we have the ability to wage a war if we needed to, right? It's kind of how I look at it. It's like if you have like a strong manufacturing base and you have a strong tech sector, if there ever was a big war, Canada would be able to play its part. I'm a pacifist. I don't want to go to war, but I certainly don't want to be a nation that has zero ability to wage war. That's also kind of a scary thought, right? Ideally we're pacifists who carry a very big stick. Is one way to think about it.
All right.
But anyway, that's just not to get too political here, but that's like just my own personal philosophy. And so the innovation spending here in Canada has been fantastic. The non-dilutive funding has been fantastic. Now the venture capital in Canada is good. There's some great companies like VanEdge, Chrysalix, Rhino Ventures. There's lots of great ones in Canada that I really love. That said, it's not quite at the same scale nowhere near at the same scale as Silicon Valley. And so I often get a little jealous of the US that way. But the good news is that we can raise money here from those venture firms as well. Those venture firms tend to often, like Playground Global, for example, funded IDEA in Vancouver, right? So I think that there's a lot of potential for Canadian startups to get funding from these American firms. But the biggest mistake people make is they just don't go big enough. Like they're not going for the big enough TAM. They're going for after little niche markets. It's hard to get funding for a niche market. Or they're going after a big market, but they're going after a niche market first, and they're having trouble telling the story about the big picture and how they're using the niche as a beachhead or as a toehold to get into the bigger markets. With the way that Canadian firms tend to tell that story, we tend to be quite modest, and we sort of downplay it a little bit. And I think that that's a problem. That's something that Canadian startups need to fix. And then last thing on the funding side is like just sheer numbers. You got to ask for intros. You got to get on those phone calls. For every 20, 30, 40, VCs you talk to or angels you talk to, maybe one of them's going to work out. And so it's just a lot of phone calls. Like if you're raising money, you just can't be shy about it. It's similar to sales that way. Yeah. Like you're doing sales. Like people who are really good at sales tend to also be pretty good at raising money. Not always, but sometimes. Does that answer your question?
It more than answers my question. And I love that you also, too, were mentioning like the storytelling that Canadians have to do on their own behalf, and even how that's tied to sales, too. Pump your chests, beat the drum. You guys are doing amazing stuff up there, and you got to get that funding. And it's available if you can get that story out there. And to your point, think big. Look for the biggest TAM. Make yourself seem as ambitious as you really are when you're going after all of that. You also took the words right out of my mouth when you were talking about just like how generous Canada is in terms of giving that non-dilutive funding out to the innovators. Love the pacifists who carry a big stick. Maybe that's the backup title of the episode. We can put that in our back pocket. I'll attribute it to you, of course. But I think it is an attitude thing, and I think it also I don't think it all ties back to how the funding mechanisms in the US are so different compared to Canada and how Canada is more generous with the innovation funding because that's how they characterize it. Whereas a lot of businesses in the US, they got to go after VCs and they got to be a little more cynical maybe in their approach about it. That's
Yeah.
making a big leap there that I don't want to hang my hat on that. I know there's lots of think pieces about that too, and there's been lots of back and forth. I'm just thinking about LinkedIn and when I go up to Toronto for events about people saying, oh, Canadians aren't ambitious, where I'm like, that's absolutely not what I've witnessed firsthand. So, but I do think it's a conversation that needs to be had, especially when, again, there is the opportunity up in Canada and there is so much support up in Canada from places like Misty West and all the different names that you mentioned, and even like provincial funding programs too. When we were talking about defense kind of as a standalone, I was thinking about my buddy Joshua going to a defense specific conference and kicking ass at it up in, I think it was Newfoundland. I might be mistaken.
Oh, cool.
But each province, they have their lane too, and they fund it on
Yep.
top of the federal funding too that comes
That's
down.
right.
So it's just it's incredible. Every time I learn more about the opportunities up there, I'm just like, do we have an equivalent down here? Not really. We kind of just have the R&D program, then state by state. Sure, pick your flavor, but they're not that dissimilar. I digress.
Yeah.
Don't want to poo-poo the U.S. funding system. We love them all, but
Yep.
knowing that we are going to be at time soon. Couple more things I want to know. What's next for Misty West? What's on your roadmap? I know that you guys got some events coming up that the Boast team is going to try to tag along with you on. Can't wait to
Yeah.
meet you in person, hopefully sooner than later. But
Yeah.
tell me what you
For
got
sure.
cooking. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Man. We're responsible. We founded and are responsible for the most legendary party at CES in Las Vegas in early January called CES Founders and Friends. I think this will be like our 9th or 10th year. So it's a pretty big deal. Doing it a long time, doing it for 10 years because we skipped a year in COVID. And it's every year we get about 1,000 people that want to come to this party, and there's only really room for a few hundred people, and so we got a huge wait list. Um, and which is like it's I sound like I'm boasting here, but really like it's just we've been doing it so long. It's not. But we're nothing special. It's just like we had the right idea at the right time, and which was to like do an off strip warehouse type party. Like it feels very like it doesn't feel very corporate. Let's put it that way. Like it feels like a proper party. There's like dancing and there's DJs and it's like, and
It is.
it's not just a bunch of it, it's not just like a bunch of Vegas sweaty dudes or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a proper party, and a lot of people that go to it swear by it. And there's so many
Yeah.
people that say, I would, I don't even go to CES anymore. I just go to just the Founders and Friends party. They come for
That's
just the
cool.
party, and then yeah, they don't even stay for the conference. So it's just because you meet so many good people there, and there's good people you see year after year, and the community is the intelligent connected devices community is so strong that it's great to have these kinds of events for forming these long term bonds of between kindred spirits, so to speak. And then in Vancouver, we do the hardware tech, hard tech awards.
Oh yeah.
So they were previously known as the Misty's Awards. That name was a little bit self-centered of us to call it the Misty's Awards. So we renamed it to the Hard Tech Awards. We have another thing called the Hard Tech Forum, and they kind of go hand in hand. And we do that during Web Summit. So Web Summit is a huge tech conference in Vancouver. Big deal. It gets bigger. I think it used to have another name. We really took that seriously and took that to heart and decided to try to piggyback our award ceremony on top of that. So we now do this award ceremony in Vancouver every year. We're going into our 5th year of that now, or 6th year.
Awesome.
And yeah, we get big sponsorship for it every year. We give out cash prizes to the top winners. But it's like the closest thing that exists to like be an exaggeration to say Nobel Prize, but it's like a red dot design award, but it's for individuals, right? It's
Yeah.
not for the company. It's not for the startup. It's not for a specific product. It's for a specific individual. Think of it as like a lifetime achievement award for product designers, engineers, project managers, program managers, founders. You get the idea. So it's basically the life, whoever was the lifeblood of that project, or those projects plural, it deserves to be nominated for these awards. So if you worked on a project and you know someone who was sort of an unsung hero of that project that really needed recognition or deserved recognition, we highly, highly, highly suggest that you nominate them for this award. And so we'll send you some links and things like that for the award. But if you just search for the Hard Tech Awards, you can't miss it. So that's the second event. I already mentioned the Hard Tech Forum, which happens in San Francisco during Deep Tech Week. It also happens in Vancouver. And then we do these like little dinner parties as well. So for all of our sponsors like Nordic, Memfault, SolidWorks, in the past Hawkridge, in the past Altium, also not to mention Edge Impulse, who got recently acquired by Qualcomm, August Electronics. All these companies have been really great to us, and they all get invited to participate in all these events throughout the year, and it just keeps snowballing, and so that's like our main like marketing lead gen activity is like basically we think of it as like community building activities, events, awards, that kind of stuff, and that for us is our like non-slimy way of like it feels really natural and organic. It doesn't feel like too salesy, That's kind of why we do it.
No, that is so aligned. Again, I think I said it earlier, but with the ethos that we have here at Boast. Go ahead.
And with Intent as well. I missed the sponsor as well. With Intent, Intent based in Europe. With Intent is a great sponsor of ours as well. I forgot to mention that. That sponsor. I'm probably forgetting a few others, but yeah.
I will make sure that all of those sponsors get shout outs in the blog write-up for this. I'll also make sure that I have links to all of these things that we're discussing in the blog write-up so that all the folks listening to this can investigate. They can look into what they could get in. They can try to get on that wait list for the CES show. I'm pumped about Web Summit. I had a blast at last year's. I remember I was rooting on Chris Hobbs while he was doing some kind of race thing. I just like how personal you can get at Web Summit, even though it's huge. So you talking about that Nobel Prize for the people who really make the difference on the Hard Tech Awards. So makes sense with what I've seen. But yeah, Leigh, this has been fantastic. I am so excited that Boast has partnered with you guys and that, again, we don't have to be slimy. We can be partners in the network and we can work together on things and try to get all the innovation that is on the table in Canada, in the US and beyond, out to market, where it's going to be effective and where it can make positive change and positive impact. You guys got the recipe. We love to be on your side. So this is fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for saying that. Yeah, I didn't talk too much about the positive impact side. But yeah, I forgot to mention like the whole point of our company is like to help achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. That's kind of like the driving mission statement for the whole company. We try to the projects that we choose projects that we really fundamentally believe are going to move the needle for the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
I love it. No, that's fantastic. And yeah, I'm going to hold off on shouting out some of the other folks who we're going to have on the podcast, but a lot of folks are aligned to that UN Sustainable Development Goals. And that's really what I feel like. I'm happy that Boast is hanging the hat on that too. It is positive. It's not cynical. And it's going to benefit everybody in the long run and the short run if we can help work together as a team. So I love it.
We're living in a pretty cynical world these days, so it's nice. It's nice to have a little bit of positivity, and I think it's so easy to slip into that win-lose mentality, and nothing pleases me more when you get a bunch of really smart engineers together, product creators, and you really embark on a new journey together on a big new product introduction, whether it's on the industrial, commercial, or consumer side. And you take it from concept to completion. It goes to mass production. It's just like the best feeling in the world.
Oh, I love it. That's music to my ears, Leigh. Well, cannot thank you enough. Really look forward to, again, hopefully meeting in person sooner than later.
Thanks, Paul. It's been great. Really enjoy it. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.